My husband got my best friend pregnant while I was traveling and planning a surprise for him, but what I did afterward left everyone shocked. I'd been planning Garrett's 30th birthday surprise for 3 months. While he thought I was on a boring work conference in Denver, I was actually coordinating with caterers, booking his favorite band, and flying in his college buddies from across the country. I even convinced his mom to drive up from Phoenix, which was no small feat considering she hated making the 6-hour drive and had arthritis in her hands that made long drives painful. The party was set for Saturday night at the community center downtown. I'd rented the entire building, hired a photographer, arranged for his college band to reunite for one night only, and even got his favorite restaurant to cater the event. The guest list included everyone who mattered to him: family, coworkers, college friends, our neighbors, even his old boss who'd moved to Seattle. I flew back Thursday to finalize everything, my heart racing with excitement. I couldn't wait to see his face when 50 people jumped out yelling surprise. This was going to be the party of the decade, the kind of celebration people would talk about for years. I decided to swing by the house first to grab the decorations I'd hidden in the garage behind the Christmas boxes. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Bethany's silver Honda parked out front at an odd angle, like she'd been in a hurry. That was strange. My best friend since high school knew I was supposed to be out of town until Friday. We'd texted just that morning about how exhausted I was from the conference session. I walked through the front door, setting my suitcase down quietly in the entryway. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't identify. I heard voices upstairs, laughing, then other sounds that made my stomach drop to my feet and my hands start shaking. I crept up the stairs, each step feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. Our bedroom door was cracked open just enough for me to see inside. Through that narrow gap, I saw them, Garrett and Bethany, in our bed. The king-size bed I'd picked out after months of shopping and saving. The Egyptian cotton sheets I'd bought for our 5th wedding anniversary because they were supposed to represent a fresh start for us. But that wasn't the worst part. Not even close. Bethany's hand was resting protectively on her stomach, and she was whispering something about doctor appointments and due dates, and how she was already showing at 12 weeks. She was pregnant. With his baby. The baby I'd been trying to give him for 2 years of scheduled intimacy and fertility tracking and disappointment. I stood there frozen in the hallway, listening to them plan their future. They talked about how they'd tell me after my trip, how they'd been trying to figure this out for months, how they'd practiced the conversation, how sorry they were that it had happened, but how they couldn't help falling in love, how they'd started as friends confiding in each other about their problems, and it had just evolved naturally. Months. While I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for this party, taking on extra freelance projects to afford the band, skipping lunch to save money for decorations, they were falling in love behind my back. They'd been planning this conversation while I was planning his surprise party. I backed away slowly, my mind racing and my vision starting to blur at the edges. In 12 hours, 50 people would be showing up to celebrate the man who'd been cheating on me with my best friend, the woman who was carrying his child while I'd been charting my ovulation and taking prenatal vitamins just in case. That's when the idea hit me like a lightning bolt, clear and brilliant and terrible. Instead of confronting them, I drove to my sister's house across town, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Emma took one look at my face when she opened the door and immediately pulled me inside, pouring 2 generous glasses of wine without saying a word. She'd always been able to read me better than anyone, even better than my husband, apparently. "What happened?" she asked, settling onto her couch beside me and tucking her legs under her. I told her everything, about catching them together, about the pregnancy, about the months of lying, about the party tomorrow night that I'd spent 3 months and $8,000 planning, about how I'd been trying to get pregnant while my husband was already creating a baby with someone else, about how every business trip I'd taken, every late night at the office had been an opportunity for them to be together in my house, in my bed. By the time I finished, Emma was staring at me in complete disbelief, her wine glass forgotten in her hand. "So what are you going to do?" she asked quietly, and I could hear the concern in her voice. I smiled for the first time in hours. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that meant someone was about to get exactly what they deserved. "I'm going to give him the surprise of his life," I said, and Emma's eyes widened. "You're not going to do anything crazy, are you?" she asked, but I could see a spark of something in her expression that looked almost like approval. "Define crazy," I replied. The next morning, I woke up with perfect clarity about what needed to happen. I called everyone on the guest list, but instead of canceling, I changed the narrative completely. "I have some unexpected news to share at the party," I told each person, keeping my voice light and excited. "Something that will change everything. Please still come. You won't want to miss this. It's going to be a night to remember." Most people assumed I was pregnant. His mom even asked if she should bring her camera for a special announcement. I just laughed and told her to definitely bring the camera. I spent Friday gathering evidence like I was preparing for the trial of the century. Phone records showing hundreds of calls between Garrett and Bethany while I was traveling for work, often lasting hours. Hotel receipts from nights they'd spent together when I was supposedly working late at the office. Credit card statements showing romantic dinners I'd never been to, jewelry purchases from Tiffany that I'd never received, flowers sent to addresses that weren't our house. I also found their entire text conversation history on our shared cloud backup. Messages about how guilty they felt but how they couldn't stay away from each other. Photos they'd taken together in our house, in our bed, wearing clothes I'd bought them for Christmas. Screenshots of apartment listings they'd been looking at together. Even a sonogram photo she'd sent him with a heart emoji. The security footage from our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, was the final piece. She'd always been suspicious of strangers and had cameras covering every angle of the street. She was more than happy to share the footage when I explained I was concerned about potential break-ins during my business trips. The timestamps showed Bethany entering our house dozens of times while I was away, sometimes staying overnight. I called my lawyer Friday afternoon. Margaret had handled my business contracts for years and knew me well enough to not ask too many questions when I requested immediate divorce papers. The grounds are adultery and financial misconduct, I told her, forwarding all the evidence. I want this filed first thing Monday morning. Are you sure you want to proceed this quickly? She asked. Sometimes couples counseling can help work through infidelity. There's no working through this, I replied. He got her pregnant. They've been planning a life together while spending my money to fund it. Saturday morning, I went to the salon and got my hair and nails done. I wanted to look absolutely perfect for what was coming. Then I went shopping for a new dress, something that would photograph well and make me feel powerful. I settled on a deep red number that hugged my curves and made my skin glow. Saturday evening arrived. I spent an hour getting ready, doing my makeup with the precision of a woman preparing for war. I put on the diamond earrings Garrett had given me for our anniversary, the ones he'd probably charged to our joint credit card like everything else. If this was going to be my last performance as his wife, I wanted to look absolutely stunning. The guests started arriving at 7. I greeted everyone with the brightest smile I could manage, playing the perfect hostess role I'd perfected over 5 years of marriage. His college friends were already sharing embarrassing stories about their freshman year roommate. His co-workers from the accounting firm were mingling awkwardly with our neighbors. His parents were setting up the gift table and taking photos of the decorations. Garrett seemed confused by the early arrivals and the elaborate setup, but pleased by the turnout. He kept asking me when I'd had time to plan all this, and I just winked and said it was a surprise. The biggest surprise of his life, actually. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time. The catered food was delicious, the bar was well stocked, and the photographer I'd hired was capturing every moment. It really did look like the perfect party. Bethany arrived fashionably late at 8:30, wearing a loose purple blouse that almost hit her bump if you didn't know what to look for. But I knew. I'd been studying pregnancy websites for 2 years. She hugged me tightly, her perfume the same vanilla scent she'd worn since high school, and whispered how sorry she was that I'd had to cut my work trip short for a family emergency. Family emergency, I said, squeezing her back just a little too tight. But everything worked out perfectly. Sometimes the best surprises come when you least expect them. She pulled back and looked at me strangely, like she was trying to read something in my expression, but I just smiled and offered to get her a drink. Something non-alcoholic, of course. By 9 o'clock, everyone had arrived. The community center was packed with people laughing and celebrating. Garrett's mom was taking pictures of everything with her new digital camera. His dad was holding court by the bar, telling war stories to anyone who'd listen. His college band had set up their equipment and were tuning their instruments for a reunion performance. It really was the perfect party. Everything I'd dreamed it would be. That's when I called for everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming, I announced, holding up my champagne glass and tapping it with a fork until the room fell silent. As you know, tonight is Garrett's 30th birthday. We've been together for 7 years, married for 5, and I thought it was time to share some special memories with all of you. I gestured to the large projector screen I'd set up at the front of the room, the same kind they used for corporate presentations. I've put together a little video montage of our relationship, a celebration of our journey together, and some very exciting news about our future. Garrett beamed, his face lighting up with genuine joy and surprise. Several people awed appreciatively, already pulling out their phones to record his reaction. His mom grabbed her camera to capture the moment. "This is so thoughtful, honey," he said, wrapping his arm around my waist. "I love you so much." "I love you too," I replied, and meant it. I love the man I thought he was. I love the marriage I thought we had. I love the future I thought we were building together. I pressed play on the laptop connected to the projector. The video started innocently enough. Our engagement photos, him down on one knee in Central Park with tears in his eyes. Our wedding day, him looking handsome in his tuxedo, me in my grandmother's lace dress that had been altered to fit perfectly. Our first dance to the song that would forever remind me of this betrayal. Then came clips from vacations we'd taken to Mexico and Colorado, and that long weekend in Nashville. Sweet moments captured over 5 years of marriage. Our first apartment with its terrible brown carpet. The day we bought our house and stood proudly in front of the for sale sign with sold stamped across it. Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations. Him surprising me with a puppy for my 28th birthday. Everyone was smiling, pointing at themselves in various photos, laughing at the younger versions of people they'd known for years. Then the tone shifted so subtly that it took a moment for people to realize what they were seeing. The screen filled with text messages between Garrett and Bethany, screenshots of their conversations about meeting up while I was traveling for work, messages about how much they missed each other and couldn't wait to see each other again, photos of them together that I'd never seen before. The room fell silent so completely that you could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. Garrett's face went white as a sheet, then gray, then green, but I wasn't done, not even close. The next slide showed Bethany's pregnancy test, those 2 pink lines that had probably filled her with terror and excitement in equal measure. Then came their text exchange about the baby, about how they'd tell me, about how scared they were, but how happy they were too. Then came the hotel receipts, the Marriott downtown, the same hotel where we'd spent our wedding night 5 years earlier, the Hilton by the airport, the bed and breakfast in the mountains where I'd always wanted to go, but we'd never been able to afford, credit card statements for jewelry from Tiffany that I'd never received, a tennis bracelet that cost more than our mortgage payment, earrings that matched the ones I was wearing, except mine were probably fake, restaurant bills for romantic dinners at places I'd always wanted to try but never had. Gasps echoed around the room like a wave. Garrett's mom dropped her camera, the sound of plastic hitting concrete echoing through the stunned silence. His dad's beer bottle slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. "Surprise," I said cheerfully into the microphone I'd borrowed from the community center's sound system. "It turns out my husband and my best friend have been having an affair for the past 10 months. Oh, and she's pregnant with his baby. The baby I've been trying to give him for 2 years." Chaos erupted like someone had thrown a match into gasoline. People started talking all at once, their voices rising in shock and disbelief. Some moved toward the door, grabbing their coats and purses. Others stared at the screen, then at Garrett, then at Bethany, trying to process what they were seeing. His college roommate turned to stare at Garrett with his mouth hanging open. "Dude, what the hell is this?" he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. This is insane. Garrett finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and desperate. This isn't what it looks like, he stammered, but his words were drowned out by the murmur of 50 horrified guests. This is taken out of context. You don't understand. Bethany was crying, her hands pressed to her stomach, mascara streaming down her cheeks in black rivers that stained her purple blouse. I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. But wait, I announced, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. There's so much more to share with all of you. The screen changed again, this time showing financial records. Bank statements showing money Garrett had been systematically moving from our joint account to a secret account I'd never known existed. Evidence of our savings being depleted to fund his double life. The down payment money for our dream house, gone. My inheritance from grandma, gone. The emergency fund we'd built up over 5 years of marriage, gone. It turns out my loving husband has been using our joint savings to pay for hotel rooms, jewelry, and romantic getaways with my best friend, I continued, my voice steady despite the way my hands were shaking, including the $8,000 I'd saved for the down payment on our dream house, the house we were supposed to buy next spring so we could start a family. By now, at least half the guests had fled, pushing through the doors like the building was on fire. The other half stood frozen in place, unsure whether to stay or go or call someone or do something to make this nightmare stop. The catering staff had stopped serving and were huddled in corners, whispering among themselves. The photographer I'd hired was still taking pictures, capturing every moment of the destruction with professional detachment. Garrett's best friend from work stepped forward, his face red with anger. Man, this is seriously screwed up, he said, shaking his head in disgust. I thought you were better than this. We all did. Garrett looked around the room at the faces of his family and friends, all staring at him with varying degrees of disgust, disappointment, and betrayal. His own mother couldn't meet his eyes, her hands covering her mouth in horror. I can explain, he said desperately, his voice cracking like a teenager going through puberty. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. We didn't mean for it to go this far. No need to explain, I replied cheerfully, my voice echoing through the room via the sound system. I think the evidence speaks for itself quite clearly. I walked over to the gift table where I'd placed one final surprise among all the wrapped presents. A manila envelope with his name written on it in my careful cursive handwriting. And now, my birthday gift to you, I said, handing it to him with the sweetest smile I could manage. He opened it with shaking hands that could barely grip the paper. Inside were divorce papers, thick and official and stamped by the court. Already filed, already served, already processed through the legal system. I had these drawn up yesterday, I explained to our remaining audience, many of whom were now openly staring in fascination at this real-life soap opera. My lawyer says I have an excellent case for getting everything, considering the adultery and systematic financial deception. Apparently, judges don't look kindly on husbands who drain joint accounts to fund affairs with their wives' best friends. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Garrett's mom finally approached me, tears streaming down her weathered face. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I had no idea he was capable of something like this. This isn't how I raised him. I know you didn't, I replied gently, touching her arm with genuine affection. I'd always loved his parents, and this wasn't their fault. That's why I wanted you to find out this way, so you'd know the truth, and wouldn't have to wonder what really happened to our marriage. She nodded, then walked over to her son with the slow, deliberate steps of someone whose heart was breaking. I raised you better than this, she said quietly, her voice full of disappointment that cut deeper than any screaming could have. Your father and I taught you to be honest and faithful, and to honor your commitments. What happened to those values? What happened to the man we thought we raised? She gathered her purse and coat and headed for the door without waiting for an answer, her husband following behind her with his shoulders slumped in defeat. One by one, the remaining guests filed out into the cool night air. Some stopped to hug me and offer their support, whispering that they'd had no idea and promising to call me tomorrow. Others avoided eye contact, too uncomfortable with the drama to say anything, but clearly taking mental notes for the gossip sessions that would follow. A few of the women whispered that they'd suspected something, but hadn't wanted to say anything without proof. One of his coworkers mentioned that Garrett had been taking a lot of personal calls lately and seemed distracted. Garrett's brother paused at the door, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. You didn't deserve this, he told me, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry he turned out to be such a coward. You were always too good for him anyway. Soon it was just Garrett, Bethany, and me standing in the empty community center, surrounded by the detritus of a failed celebration. Half-eaten appetizers sat abandoned on tables. Drinks had been left behind in the rush to escape. The decorations I'd spent hours hanging looked ridiculous now, birthday streamers and balloons mocking the wreckage of my marriage. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. You've ruined everything, Bethany finally said, her voice breaking through the quiet like a sob. Everything we built, everything we planned, everything we dreamed about. I ruined everything? I laughed, but there was no humor in it, just sharp edges and bitter irony. You're pregnant with my husband's baby. You've been lying to my face for 10 months while I planned this party to celebrate him, while I worked overtime to pay for it, while I tried to get pregnant myself, not knowing he was already creating a family with someone else. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said through her tears, her voice small and broken. We tried to stay away from each other. We tried to do the right thing. When? I asked, stepping closer to her, my voice rising. When did you try to do the right thing? When you were sleeping with him in my bed? When you were spending my money on hotel rooms? When you were planning your future together while I was planning his birthday party? Neither of them had an answer. They just stood there looking miserable and caught and small. The building suddenly felt too big and too empty and too full of the ghosts of what my life used to be. I picked up my purse and keys from the table where I'd set them hours earlier, back when I was still pretending to be the perfect wife planning the perfect party for the perfect marriage. I'll be staying at my sister's place, I announced, my voice echoing in the empty space. I expect you both gone from my house by tomorrow night. The locks will be changed Monday morning, and the security system will be activated. Don't test me on this. As I walked toward the exit, Garrett grabbed my arm with desperate fingers. Please, he said, his eyes red and swollen with unshed tears. We can work this out. I made a mistake. People make mistakes all the time. I stopped and looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd loved since I was 23 years old. This man I'd trusted with my future, my dreams, my heart, my body, my bank account, my deepest fears and greatest hopes. There's nothing to work out, I said, pulling my arm free from his grip. You didn't make a mistake, Garrett. You made hundreds of deliberate choices over 10 months. You chose to lie to me every single day. You chose to sleep with my best friend in our bed. You chose to spend our money on your affair. You chose to get her pregnant while I was trying to have your baby. You chose to plan a future with her while letting me plan a future with you. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions. Conscious, deliberate, selfish decisions. I walked to my car and drove away, leaving them standing in the wreckage of what used to be our life together. At Emma's house, she was waiting with ice cream and tissues and a bottle of expensive wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. Well, she said as I collapsed on her familiar couch, still wearing my red dress, this definitely qualifies as special. How do you feel? She asked after pouring us both generous glasses. I thought about it for a moment, expecting to feel devastated and hollow and destroyed. Instead, something else washed over me, something I hadn't felt in months. Free, I said finally, and the word felt like truth in my mouth. For the first time in months, maybe years, I feel completely free. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and paperwork, and dividing up 5 years of shared possessions like we were dissolving a business partnership. Word spread quickly through our social circle about what had happened at the party, and the story grew in the telling until it became local legend. Most of our friends reached out to offer support and share their own stories of being blindsided by cheating spouses. Apparently, this kind of betrayal was more common than I'd realized, which was both comforting and depressing. A few chose sides and went with Garrett and Bethany, which told me everything I needed to know about who they really were. I was fine with that. It made it easier to know who my real friends were, and who had always been more loyal to him than to me or to the truth. My lawyer, Margaret, was absolutely ruthless in the divorce proceedings. The evidence I'd gathered made it impossible for Garrett to claim anything other than complete fault. The financial records showing his systematic use of our joint accounts to fund the affair were particularly damaging in court. The judge was a woman in her 50s who had clearly seen this scenario play out before and had no patience for it. Mr. Williams, she said during our final hearing, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a scalpel, you systematically depleted joint marital assets to conduct an extramarital affair with your wife's closest friend. You then got your affair partner pregnant while your wife was working additional hours to support your household and attempting to conceive your child. I find your conduct not merely reprehensible, but calculated and cruel. Your explanations are insufficient, and your remorse appears to be limited to regret at being caught, rather than genuine understanding of the harm you've caused. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized with terms so favorable to me that even Margaret seemed surprised. I got the house, most of our savings, his entire retirement account, spousal support for 5 years, and all the furniture except for his clothes and personal items. The judge was definitely not sympathetic to men who cheat on their wives with their best friends while systematically depleting joint assets to fund their betrayal. Bethany had a miscarriage 8 weeks after the party. Despite everything she'd done to me, I felt terrible for her loss. Losing a pregnancy is devastating regardless of the circumstances surrounding it, and I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone. Part of me wondered if the stress of that night had contributed to it, and I carried some guilt about that for months. My therapist helped me work through those feelings and reminded me that stress doesn't typically cause miscarriages in the first trimester, and that their choices had created the situation, not my reaction to discovering their betrayal. But Bethany and Garrett didn't last much longer after losing the baby. Turns out their relationship had been built entirely on excitement, secrecy, forbidden passion, and the thrill of getting away with something. Without those elements, they discovered they had almost nothing in common. The reality of being together openly, dealing with real-world problems without the fantasy and drama, was nothing like the romance they'd created in stolen moments and hotel rooms. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Garrett at the grocery store where we used to shop together every Sunday morning. He looked tired and older, like the weight of what he'd lost had finally settled on his shoulders. His hair was going gray at the temples, and he'd gained weight. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, someone young with bleached blonde hair and too much makeup, who looked like she was trying too hard to fill a role she didn't understand. How are you doing? He asked awkwardly, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a guilty child caught in a lie. Really well, actually, I replied honestly, and I meant it. I'm seeing someone new, someone who doesn't lie to me about working late or business trips, someone who doesn't have secret bank accounts or hidden phone bills or mysterious female friends. He nodded, looking uncomfortable while his new girlfriend examined the produce with obvious discomfort, pretending not to listen but clearly taking in every word. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the grocery store's Muzak version of a song that used to mean something to us. For everything. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. I've been wanting to call you for months. I know you are, I replied, and I could see that he meant it, that the regret was real and deep and permanent. But sorry doesn't change what happened. Sorry doesn't give me back the 10 months you spent lying to my face. Sorry doesn't restore the trust you destroyed or the friendship you helped ruin or the marriage you threw away. As I walked away with my groceries, I felt the last weight lift from my shoulders, the final chain break that had been binding me to anger and hurt and the need for his validation or remorse. A year later, I threw myself another party. This time it was to celebrate my promotion at work and my new relationship with David, a divorced father of two I'd met through a mutual friend at a book club. He'd been through his own devastating betrayal when his ex-wife left him for his business partner, so he understood the importance of complete honesty and open communication and the fragility of trust. As I looked around at my friends and family, all genuinely happy and celebrating with me in Emma's backyard, I thought about that awful night when I discovered Garrett's betrayal and decided to expose it publicly. I'd lost a husband and a best friend, but I'd gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I deserved better than people who would lie to my face while plotting behind my back, and that sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the most important revelation about your own worth and resilience. The party that night had been about revenge, yes, but it had also been about truth and justice and refusing to be a victim, about taking control of my own narrative instead of letting them write the story of my humiliation in private, about choosing transparency over comfortable lies. 2 years later, David and I got engaged in the same community center where I'd exposed Garrett's affair. It seemed fitting somehow, reclaiming that space and those memories. When people ask how we met, I tell them it's a long story about learning to trust again after betrayal and finding someone worthy of that trust. Some people deserve the whole truth, and others just get the summary. But I always end with the same lesson. Sometimes the worst surprise leads to the best new beginning, and sometimes you have to tear down everything false to build something real. The marriage that followed was built on a foundation of complete honesty and transparency that we both insisted upon. David and I promised each other we'd never have to play detective in our own relationship. We'd never have to wonder where the other person was, or who they were with, or what they were really doing when they claimed to be working late. We share phone passwords and bank accounts and calendars and daily schedules, not because we don't trust each other, but because we never want there to be room for secrets or deception between us. We learned the hard way that relationships can't survive in darkness, and that love without honesty is just an elaborate lie. Sometimes when I'm cleaning out old boxes or organizing photos, I'll come across pictures from Garrett's birthday party, images from before the reveal, when everyone was smiling and celebrating and had no idea what was coming. I look at those photos now and I can see it in my own face, the forced smile of someone who is already carrying the weight of a secret, even though I didn't fully understand it yet. But I also see something else in those pictures, determination and strength I didn't know I possessed. Even then, some part of me knew I was going to fight for my truth and my dignity and my right to a better life. That night changed everything, not just my marriage or my friendships, but my entire understanding of what I was willing to accept in my life. I learned that I was capable of protecting myself, even when it meant destroying everything I thought I wanted. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to refuse to accept less than you deserve. The story has become something of a legend in our social circle and beyond. People still talk about the birthday party where everything fell apart and came together at the same time. Some people think I went too far, that I should have handled it privately, that public humiliation was unnecessarily cruel. Others think Garrett and Bethany got exactly what they deserved, that cheaters forfeit the right to privacy about their deception, that sunshine is the best disinfectant for lies and betrayal. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between, but I also think that when someone betrays you that completely, that systematically, for that long, they forfeit the right to control how their deception is revealed. They chose to lie to me for 10 months. I chose to tell the truth for 10 minutes. And I've never regretted that choice for a single day of my life since. The years that followed brought a kind of peace I hadn't known was possible. David and I built something real together, something that didn't require constant vigilance or fear. Our wedding was small and intimate, held in Emma's garden with only the people who had supported us through our worst moments. But the story of Garrett's birthday party took on a life of its own. It spread beyond our social circle, shared in online forums and support groups for people dealing with infidelity. I started getting messages from strangers who had seen their own situations reflected in mine. One woman wrote to tell me she'd found out about her husband's affair the same way, walking in on them, but had kept it secret for months, trying to work it out privately while slowly dying inside. Reading about my party had given her the courage to demand the truth she deserved. Another message came from a man whose wife had been cheating with his brother. He'd been planning to confront them quietly, to try to save face for the family, but he realized that their comfort didn't matter more than his truth. These messages made me understand something I hadn't expected. My story had become bigger than just my revenge or my healing. It had become a reminder that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to protect other people from the consequences of their own choices. 3 years after the divorce, I got a call that surprised me. It was Garrett's mom, Ruth. "I hope you don't mind me calling," she said, her voice uncertain. "I got your number from Emma." I was quiet for a moment, then told her I was glad to hear from her. "I wanted you to know that Dad and I have been thinking about you," she continued. "We see you sometimes around town with your new husband, and you look happy, really happy." "I am happy," I told her honestly. "We never got to properly apologize," she said, "for what our son did to you, for the years we lost with you. You were the daughter we always wanted, and he threw that away along with everything else." Her voice broke a little. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said gently. "You raised him with good values. What he did with those values was his choice. We want you to know that we never approved of what he did. We told him so. We told him he was a fool and a coward, and that he'd lost the best thing that ever happened to him." I was surprised to feel tears in my eyes. "How is he now?" I asked, not sure why I wanted to know. "Lonely," she said simply. "He's had a few relationships since Bethany, but nothing serious. I think he knows he'll never find what he had with you. He asks about you sometimes. We don't tell him much, but we tell him you're happy. We think that's what he needs to hear." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and consequences and the different ways people carry their regrets. David found me there when he got home from work. "Everything okay?" he asked, reading my expression immediately. I told him about the call, and he listened without judgment. Do you miss him sometimes? He asked, and I loved him for being secure enough to ask that question. I miss who I thought he was, I said. I miss the marriage I thought we had, but I don't miss the reality of what it actually was. 5 years after that night at the community center, I ran into Bethany at a coffee shop downtown. She was alone, reading a book, and she looked older, tired. When she saw me, she seemed to consider leaving, but then she waved me over. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I sat down across from her anyway. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. Not just for what I did, but for how long it took me to understand why what you did that night was necessary. I was quiet, letting her continue. I spent years being angry at you for humiliating us publicly, but I finally realized that we had humiliated you privately for months. We had made you the fool in your own life without giving you the information to make your own choices about it. She looked down at her hands. I lost myself in that relationship with Garrett. I became someone I didn't recognize, someone who could lie to her best friend's face while sleeping with her husband. I had to live with the consequences of that publicly, and maybe I needed to. Maybe we both did. I studied her face, looking for manipulation or self-pity, but I saw something different. Genuine remorse, growth, the kind that only comes from really sitting with the harm you've caused. I forgive you, I said, and meant it. Not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. We talked for another hour. She told me about the therapy she'd done, the work she'd put into understanding how she'd justified the affair to herself, how she'd convinced herself that my marriage must have been unhappy if Garrett was willing to stray, and how she'd finally realized that was just a story she'd told herself to avoid facing what she was really doing. When we parted ways, she hugged me. I'm glad you're happy, she said. You deserve to be happy. I am, I told her, and I hope you find your way to happiness too. That night, I told David about the encounter. How do you feel about seeing her? He asked. Surprisingly okay, I said. I think I'm finally at the point where their story is separate from mine. What they did shaped me, but it doesn't define me anymore. 10 years later, I was asked to speak at a workshop about recovering from infidelity. I almost said no. I'd built a new life and didn't want to be defined by that one terrible night forever. But then I thought about all the messages I'd received over the years, all the people who had found some piece of strength or clarity in my story. I stood in front of 50 people and told them about planning a surprise party and finding a different surprise instead. I told them about choosing truth over comfort, about refusing to protect other people from the consequences of their actions, about learning that sometimes love means letting go of someone who has chosen to let go of you. But mostly, I told them about what came after, about rebuilding, about learning to trust again, about finding someone who chose me every day and never made me wonder or doubt or search through phone records for proof of their faithfulness. In the question period afterward, a woman raised her hand. Do you ever regret how you handled it? She asked. Do you ever wish you'd done it differently? I thought about it for a moment. I regret that it was necessary, I said. I regret that my husband and best friend put me in a position where those were my choices. But no, I don't regret choosing truth. I don't regret refusing to make their betrayal my secret to keep. The audience was quiet for a moment. Sometimes people ask me if I went too far that night, if I was cruel, if I should have handled it privately, given them the dignity they hadn't given me, and maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe there was a part of me that wanted them to hurt the way I was hurting, but I also think there's something to be said for consequences that match actions. They chose to involve 50 people in the lie of my marriage by lying to them about who they were and what they were doing. I chose to involve 50 people in the truth. They had stolen months of my life by making me an unwitting actor in their deception. I gave them 10 minutes of honesty in return, and in the end, that honesty freed all of us to live more authentic lives, even if it was painful at the time. After the workshop, a young woman approached me. My husband has been cheating, she said quietly. I found out last week. I keep going back and forth between wanting to confront him and wanting to pretend I never found out. I looked at her. So young, probably younger than I'd been when I married Garrett. What does your gut tell you to do? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. It tells me that I can't unknow what I know, she said finally, and that I can't build a real marriage on a foundation of lies, even if they're not my lies. Trust that instinct, I told her. Whatever you decide to do, make sure you're choosing what serves your long-term well-being, not just what's comfortable in the moment. As I drove home that night, I thought about the ripple effects of that one evening 10 years earlier. How many relationships it had ended, how many others it had potentially saved, how many people had been forced to reckon with their choices because I had refused to keep their secrets. I thought about Garrett, wherever he was, and hoped he had learned to be honest in his relationships. I thought about Bethany, and hoped she had found her way to a love that didn't require deception. Mostly I thought about the version of myself who had walked up those stairs that Thursday evening, planning a surprise party and finding a life-changing betrayal instead. I wished I could tell her that the pain she was about to experience would transform her into someone stronger, someone more authentic, someone who would never again accept less than she deserved. I wished I could tell her that love, real love, was waiting for her on the other side of that devastation. I wished I could tell her that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you. But mostly I was grateful that she had found the courage to choose truth over comfort, consequences over silence, her own dignity over everyone else's peace. That choice changed everything, and I have never, for a single day since, regretted making it.